The Death Agony of Capitalism and the Tasks of the Fourth International, also known as the Transitional Program. Part 1. The Objective Prerequisites for a Socialist Revolution. The world political situation as a whole is chiefly characterized by a historical crisis of the leadership of the proletariat. The economic prerequisite for the proletarian revolution has already in general achieved the highest point of fruition that can already be reached under capitalism. Mankind's productive forces stagnate. Already, new inventions and improvements fail to raise the level of material wealth. Conjunctural crises under the conditions of the social crisis of the whole capitalist system inflict ever heavier deprivations and sufferings upon the masses. Growing unemployment in its turn deepens the financial crisis of the state and undermines the unstable monetary systems. Democratic regimes, as well as fascists, stagger on from one bankruptcy to the other. So he's really laying in the foundation of where the working class is at right now, right? So our productive forces stagnate, right? So so here he says new inventions and improvements fail to raise the level of material wealth. We get a new iPhone every year, and that's not exactly improving people's lives. We get a new video card that comes out every couple of years, and people are getting poorer, it seems, right? Better technology keeps getting invented every single year, and yet our material wealth goes down. Growing unemployment in its turn deepens the financial crisis of the state, right? So you can't pay taxes and fund the state and buy products if there's growing unemployment. So capitalism likes to maintain a balance of employed and unemployed. It tends to hover around 5% unemployed. Anything below that, the capitalists start to worry about too much labor power. Anything above that is a huge assault on wages, which means that they can't afford to buy back the products, and we enter into a crisis of overproduction. And it undermines the unstable monetary systems. So the banks start to freak out. Democratic regimes as well as fascists stagger on from one bankruptcy to another. The bourgeoisie itself sees no way out. So all these underlying contradictions, there is no way out of this. In countries where it has already been forced to stake its last upon the card of fascism, it now toboggans with closed eyes towards an economic and military catastrophe. Recessions every couple of years, exactly, Comrade Rachel. In the historically privileged countries, i.e. in those where the bourgeoisie can still, for a certain period, permit itself the luxury of democracy at the expense of national accumulations, Great Britain, France, the United States, etc., all of capital's traditional parties are in a state of perplexity, bordering on a paralysis of will. Remember, this is just on the eve of World War II. The New Deal, quote, despite its first period of pretentious resoluteness, represents but a special form of political perplexity, possible only in a country where the bourgeoisie succeeded in accumulating incalculable wealth. The present crisis, far from having run its full course, has already succeeded in showing that New Deal politics, like Popular Front politics in France, opens no new exit from the economic blind alley. So when the ruling class writes their own New Deals, right, their own deals, their own compromises with the working class, it's just Popular Frontism, right? And that's what we saw in France at the time. Popular Front is a classic failed strategy that inevitably leads to betrayal. International relations present no better picture. Under the increasing tension of capitalist disintegration, imperialist antagonisms reach an impasse at the height of which separate clashes and bloody local disturbances, like in Ethiopia, Spain. So Spain was under a civil war at this point. The Far East, Central Europe, must inevitably coalesce into a conflagration of world dimensions. The bourgeoisie, of course, is aware of the mortal danger of its domination, represented by a new war, but that class is now immeasurably less capable of averting war than on the eve of 1914. So World War II basically was a continuation of World War I, and a lot of people argue that the podcast Hell on Earth by Chapo Trap House argues that it was basically a second 30-year war, right? World War I, World War II combined with a tenuous peace in between. All talk to the effect that historical conditions have not yet ripened, for socialism is the product of ignorance or conscious deception. The objective prerequisites for the proletarian revolution have not only ripened, they have begun to get somewhat rotten. Without a socialist revolution, in the next historical period at that, a catastrophe threatens the whole culture of mankind. The turn is now to the proletariat, i.e., chiefly to its revolutionary vanguard. The historical crisis of mankind is reduced to the crisis of revolutionary leadership. So without a socialist revolution, in the next historical period, a catastrophe threatens the whole culture of mankind. He could be talking about fascism, but it's incredible. Like, I don't think he would have been absolutely horrified at what came at the end of World War II, which was the advent of nuclear weapons in the Cold War. Like, that genuinely threatened, like, our species, like, our existence. So the turn is now to the proletariat, chiefly to its revolutionary vanguard. Okay, so where is the revolutionary vanguard? Where is the leadership of the proletariat? The historical crisis of mankind is reduced to the crisis of revolutionary leadership. So, and I think a lot of Trotskyists often lay the blame at leadership in failed revolutions, because they often don't go far enough, or they haven't galvanized the working class in an undefeatable sense. So the economy, the state, the politics. Yeah, Barbenheimer. Yeah, he would have loved Barbenheimer. The economy, the state, the politics of the bourgeoisie and its international relations are completely blighted by a social crisis, characteristic of a pre-revolutionary state of society. The chief obstacle and path of transforming the pre-revolutionary into a revolutionary state is the opportunist character of proletarian leadership, its petty bourgeois cowardice before the big bourgeoisie, and its perfidious connection with it even in its death agony. So the opportunist character of proletarian revolution, that just means it's mostly reformists, right? Liberals. People who call themselves socialists but really aren't interested in actually overthrowing the system. This is Trotsky's plan to turn everyone trans. Yes. I knew there'd be a trans joke in there somewhere. You're okay. Cats in a super loud restaurant. No idea what's being said. I wonder if I should just get I know there's like automatic subtitle generators on streams. Maybe I should figure that out. In all countries, the proletariat is racked by a deep disquiet. The multi-million masses again and again enter the road of revolution, but each time they are blocked by their own conservative bureaucratic machines. The Spanish proletariat has made a series of heroic attempts since April 1931 to take power in its hands and guide the fate of society. However, its own parties, the Social Democrats, the Stalinists, the Anarchists, the Pumists, each in its own way acted as a brake and thus prepared Franco's triumphs. The looters, the agitators, the Marxists, the anarchists, and people who, quite frankly, have no idea what they are doing. In France, a great wave of sit-down strikes, particularly during June 1936, revealed the wholehearted readiness of the proletariat to overthrow the capitalist system. However, the leading organizations, the socialists, the Stalinists, the syndicalists, under the label of the Popular Front, succeeded in canalizing and damming, at least temporarily, the revolutionary stream. The unprecedented wave of sit-down strikes and the amazingly rapid growth of industrial unionism in the United States, such as the CIO. We've read about them before on stream. Pretty incredible foundation. Is the most indisputable expression of the instinctive striving of the American workers to raise themselves to the level of the tasks imposed on them by history. But here too, the leading political organizations, including the newly created CIO, do everything possible to keep in check and paralyze the revolutionary pressures of the masses. The definite passing over of the Comintern so this is the Communist International, or the Third International, I believe, to the side of bourgeois order, its cynically counter-revolutionary role throughout the world, particularly in Spain, France, the United States, and other democratic countries, created exceptional supplementary difficulties for the world proletariat. Under the banner of the October Revolution, the conciliatory politics practiced by the People's Front doomed the working class to impotence and clear the road for fascism. So yeah, People's Fronts often kowtow to limits to bourgeois demands. They're not actually revolutionary, and we'll get into a little bit about the difference between a People's Front and a united front. People's Fronts on the one hand, fascism on the other. These are the last political resources of imperialism in the struggle against proletarian revolution. From the historical point of view, however, both these resources are stopgaps. The decay of capitalism continues under the sign of the Phrygian cap in France, as well as the sign of the swastika in Germany. Nothing short of the overthrow of the bourgeoisie can open a road out. So basically saying, like, the only true thing that can stop a fascist is a communist. And indeed, that's how history bore out. The orientation of the masses is determined first by the objective conditions of decaying capitalism, and second, by the treacherous politics of the old world, of the old workers' organizations. Okay, so basically, like, it's that old Marxist, I don't want to say trope, but it's part of our foundation of materialism, is that our material conditions affect our consciousness, right? And so the conditions of capitalism in decay affects people's consciousness. And this is something that we see today. Like, there's no hope. There's no hope coming. The world is literally on fire. We are in the find out stage of climate change. And this is shaping a lot of people's consciousness. Everyone's just a lot of people are in doomer mode, or they're just completely checked out. So what do we do about it? Of these factors, the first, of course, is the decisive one. The laws of history are stronger than the bureaucratic apparatus. No matter how the methods of the social betrayers differ, from the social legislation of Blum to the judicial frame-ups of Stalin, they will never succeed in breaking the revolutionary will of the proletariat. As time goes on, their desperate efforts to hold back the wheel of history will demonstrate more clearly to the masses that the crisis of the proletarian leadership, having become the crisis in mankind's culture, can be resolved only by the Fourth International, the minimum program, and the transitional program. Okay, so here we get... So he's laying the groundwork here for, okay, where's the leadership of the proletariat? What are they up to? Right, they're forming people's fronts, and they are stopping revolution from happening. Okay, well, where's the proletariat at? Okay, well, capitalism's falling apart, and that's shaping people's consciousness. Okay, so what can we do then to raise people's consciousness, right? How do we get people to lift their heads up? How do we get workers to come to the conclusion that socialism is the only way out of this impasse, right? And this is where the program comes into being. The strategic task of the next period, pre-revolutionary period of agitation, propaganda, and organization, consists in overcoming the contradiction between the maturity of the objective revolutionary conditions and the immaturity of the proletariat and its vanguard, the confusion and disappointment of the older generation, the inexperience of the younger generation. Right, okay. So, yeah. Older generation let us down. Younger folks they're not quite there yet. They're not experienced in leading, class struggle. It is necessary to help the masses in the process of the daily struggle to find the bridge between present demand and the socialist program of the revolution. This bridge should include a system of transitional demands stemming from today's conditions and from today's consciousness of wide layers of the working class and unalterably leading to one final conclusion, the conquest of power by the proletariat. So yeah, this is kind of what the transitional demands is the demands that we can make based on the conditions that we live under right now, right? Because, you know, when you talk to people, like I was just talking to a tenant organizer. He actually runs the Ontario Tenants' Rights Facebook page. He has seen all sorts of horrific stories of landlords and doesn't know what to do. Like, it's only getting worse. The rent is outrageous, and more people are just getting tossed onto the streets. So what do we do about it? And I said, let's expropriate the landlords. And like a light bulb went up in his head. He's like, what? Like, I didn't realize that was an option. Like, yeah, let's expropriate the landlords, put them under like collective societal control. And that way, like, we can turn the tide against landlords. And he's like, dude, that is such a good idea. I'm like, yeah. You know, and it's ideas like that. It's that methodology that is laid out in the transitional program. Stemming from today's conditions and from today's consciousness of wide layers of the working class and unalterably leading to one final conclusion, the conquest of power by the proletariat. So the rent thing, that's just one example, right? And that's like, okay, let's say I agree with you. Let's expropriate the landlords. How do we get there? Well, it's simple. We overthrow capitalism. And, you know, it just meet your ones and twos like that. And eventually there is a breaking point where enough people are like, yeah, this whole system's fucking bullshit, but like no one's getting organized. So what do we do? Well, let's just organize ourselves. Classical social democracy, functioning in an epoch of progressive capitalism, divided its program into two parts independent of each other. The minimum program, which limited itself to reforms within the framework of bourgeois society, and the maximum program, which promised substitution of socialism for capitalism in the indefinite future. So when we talk about progressive capitalism, what are we talking about? We're not talking about, you know, bomb factories with trans flags out front, right? That's not what we mean by progressive. Progressive just means that like the productive forces are getting higher and higher, so we can produce more and more and more with less effort under capitalism, and yet for some reason people are getting poorer and poorer. There is a point where capitalism is turned into its opposite, and so now it's driving down wages, it's driving up poverty, and it's leading to its own negation. But for a period, capitalism really was progressive in the sense that it brought us out of feudalism, and less people have to toil and work, for example, on farms. We are now at a point where there's only 1.2% of our population in the West actually has to work on farms to feed everyone else. Like, that is inherently progressive. The mechanization of farming is majorly progressive. In theory, that would lead to far less work and toil for everybody, in theory. But capitalism is a bottomless pit of it is a remorseless eating machine, and that it can only survive by growth. So whenever I get chuds to come in here and chat and they're like, capitalism's lifted millions of people out of poverty, you could say, yes, maybe for a time, right? Every mode of production has been a step up over the previous mode of production, right? The advent of agriculture over hunting and gathering, although, you know, arguments can be made one way or the other on that one. But, you know what I mean? And even then, like, yeah, but look at the 20th century. Hundreds of millions of people have been plunged into poverty because of capitalism. Whereas nations with socialized, centralized, planned economies, Russia, China, Cuba, Vietnam, lifted millions of people out of poverty. Divided its program into two parts, independent of each other, the minimum program and the maximum program. Okay, so classic social democracy, functioning when capitalism was progressive, was on the up and up. we can have like, we can have reforms that'll make life easier. Maximum program, which promised substitution of socialism for capitalism in the indefinite future, right? So this is your like DSA types. Between the minimum and the maximum program, no bridge existed. Okay, so yeah, oh sure, we'll get to socialism later, but we have to fight for $15 an hour now. That's your social democrat stuff. But there's no bridge between the two, right? There's no bridge between $15 an hour and socialism. And indeed, social democracy has no need of such a bridge, since the word socialism is used only for holiday speechifying. The Comintern has, so I think he's talking about like holiday speechifying. I'm not sure what he means by this word. I think he's just talking about like champagne socialists, or he's talking about like they're not serious. Like they call themselves socialists, but they're not serious. They're not actual socialists. Like AOC, for instance. The Comintern has set out to follow the path of social democracy in an epoch of decaying capitalism. So the Comintern, Communist International. So how do we follow the path of social democracy? They are doing their programs based on when capitalism was going up. But the problem now is the Comintern is trying to mimic that, but now capitalism's falling apart. When in general, there can be no discussion of systematic social reforms and the raising of the masses' living standards. When every serious demand of the proletariat and even every serious demand of the petty bourgeoisie, okay, so he throws a bone to the small business owners once in a while, inevitably reaches beyond the limits of capitalist property relations and of the bourgeois state. So beyond the limits of capitalist property relations. Okay, so then workers get told that they're asking for too much. There's no way we can afford to give you guys $20 an hour and benefits and a pension and all this stuff that you need to live, right? There was a time, again, like the 1950s was a unusual boom in terms of, the growth of the so-called middle class, right? But like that was like a blip in terms of like what the way capitalism creates a downward pressure on wages. And this is why working class people need to fight back every single step of the way. That's why it feels like such an uphill battle, is because it is an uphill battle. So yeah, every serious demand of the petty bourgeoisie inevitably reaches beyond the limits of capitalist property relations and of the bourgeois state. So our demands are too high even for the bourgeois state, even for our governments to be like, look, you're asking for way too much. You're going to have to take less wages. Yeah. So the strategic task of the Fourth International lies not in reforming capitalism, but in its overthrow. Its political aim is the conquest of power by the proletariat for the purpose of expropriating the bourgeoisie. However, the achievement of this strategic task is unthinkable without the most considered attention to all, even small and partial questions of tactics. All sections of the proletariat, all its layers, occupations, and groups should be drawn into the revolutionary movement. The present epoch is distinguished not for the fact that it frees Revolutionary Party from day-to-day work, but because it permits this work to be carried on indissolubly with the actual tasks of the revolution. The Fourth International does not discard the program of the old minimal demands to the degree to which these have preserved at least part of their vital forcefulness. Indefatigably, it defends the democratic rights and social conquests of the workers, but it carries on this day-to-day work within the framework of the correct, actual, that is, revolutionary perspective. Insofar as the old partial minimal demands of the masses clash with the destructive and degrading tendencies of decadent capitalism, and this occurs at each step. The Fourth International advances a system of transitional demands, the essence of which is contained in the fact that ever more openly and decisively they will be directed against the very basis of the bourgeois regime. The old minimal program is superseded by the transitional program, the task of which lies in systematic mobilization of the masses for proletarian revolution. So minimal program essentially is like, let's ask for reform, but not too much. Let's not upset our bourgeois masters. We'll get to socialism later. Whereas, no, we're going to replace that with a transitional program. How do we transition from socialism to capitalism, right? And that's the fundamental difference between a transitional demand and a reformist demand, right? So we defend the rights of the workers that have been gained, and we have to then take it to the next level. How do we protect those rights? Revolution. Okay, so here's a wonderful demand: sliding scale of wages and sliding scale of hours. We've seen workers actually win this demand, and you'll see what it is in a sec. Under the conditions of disintegrating capitalism, the masses continue to leave the meagerized life of the oppressed, threatened now more than at any other time with the danger of being cast into the pit of pauperism. They must defend their mouthful of bread if they cannot increase or better it. There is neither the need nor the opportunity to enumerate here those separate partial demands which time and again arise on the basis of concrete circumstances, national, local, trade union, but two basic economic afflictions, which is summarized the increasing absurdity of the capitalist system, that is, unemployment and high prices, demand generalized slogans and methods of struggle. The Fourth International declares uncompromising war on the politics of the capitalists, which, to a considerable degree, like the politics of their agents, the reformists aim to place the whole burden of militarism, the crisis, the disorganization of the monetary system, and all other scourges stemming from capitalism's death agony upon the backs of the toilers. The Fourth International demands employment and decent living conditions for all. Okay, pretty simple demand. Neither monetary inflation nor stabilization can serve as slogans for the proletariat because these are but two ends of the same stick. Against a bounding rise in prices, which, with the approach of war, will assume an ever more unbridled character, i.e. World War II, one can fight only under the slogan of a sliding scale of wages. This means that collective agreements should assure an automatic rise in wages in relation to the increase of prices in consumer goods. So this is really important. Your wages should increase every year with inflation at the minimum, right? That is a minimum demand. Because if you get a raise that's less than inflation, you've taken a pay cut. Under the menace of its own disintegration, the proletariat cannot permit the transformation.
Our enemies are all those in league with imperialism, the bureaucrats, the big landlord class, and the reactionary section of the intelligentsia attached to them.
Cupcake Star, tier 1, 11 months. Thank you so much. It was John Candy in a Maoist uniform reminding us who our class enemies are. Thank you. Thank you for joining us tonight. Under the menace of its own disintegration, the proletariat cannot permit the transformation of an increasing section of the workers into chronically unemployed paupers, living off the slops of a crumbling society. The right to employment is the only serious right left to the worker in a society based upon exploitation. This right today is left to the worker in a society based upon exploitation. This right today is being shorn from him at every step. Against unemployment, structural as well as conjunctural, the time is ripe to advance along with the slogan of public works, the slogan of a sliding scale of working hours. Trade unions and other mass organizations should bind the workers and the unemployed together in the solidarity of mutual responsibility. On this basis, all the work on hand would then be divided among all existing workers in accordance with how the extent of the working week is defined. The average wage of every worker remains the same as it was under the old working week. Wages under a strictly guaranteed minimum would follow the movement of prices. It is impossible to accept any other program for the present catastrophic period. So what he's saying is, yeah, all unemployed people will be put to work. And that's just less work spread around, but the wages will stay the same. Now you might think, well, the bosses can't afford that. Yeah, exactly. The point is to discredit the bourgeoisie, saying, no, you guys cannot, you are in no position economically, politically, to do this for us. So we have to do it ourselves. So this discredits the bosses. So, for example, a lot of, sliding scale of working hours. So, yeah, you employ more people, you get rid of unemployment, right? You give more homeless people have jobs, right? What is it, like 40 to 60% of homeless people already have jobs? That's fucking nuts. But you ensure everyone has a job who needs one or who can work. And this spreads out the labor rather than pitting us against one another, you know? So this is one way how labor and the unemployed can actually come together and unite. It benefits everybody in this kind of relationship. Property owners and their lawyers will prove the unrealizability of these demands, right? Yeah, exactly. They're going to be like, we're going to go bankrupt if we hire more people and pay you the same to do less work. Especially smaller, especially ruined capitalists, in addition, will refer to their account ledgers. The workers categorically denounce such conclusions and references. The question is not one of a normal collision between opposing material interests. The question is one of guarding the proletariat from decay, demoralization, and ruin. Yeah, so the small business owners are like, well, we took all the risks, so, we should be the ones to get the reward. It's like, well, no, the workers do all the work. And if you say you can't pay them, we reject that conclusion. Fuck you. And we'll get to that. We'll get to why in a sec. The question is not one of a normal collision between opposing material interests. The question is one of guarding the proletariat from decay, demoralization, and ruin. The question is one of life and death of the only creative and progressive class, by that token, the future of mankind. If capitalism is incapable of satisfying the demands inevitably arising from the calamities generated by itself, then let it perish. The business owners are like, well, we would go under if we hired more people and paid everyone the same. All right, good. Then do it. Tough shit. Realizability or an unrealizability is in the given instance of a question of the relationship of forces, which can be decided only by the struggle. By means of the struggle, no matter what immediate practical successes may be, the workers will best come to understand the necessity of liquidating capitalist slavery. So the workers are going to be like, well, they can't afford that, so what do we do? The workers will come to the conclusion that, hey, maybe the system is broken then. If the system requires 5% of the workforce to be unemployed, then that's a broken system. Maybe we should get rid of it. Liquidating capitalist slavery. Oh, that's such a good phrase. Trade unions and the transitional epoch. Is it epoch or epoch? I never know. In the struggle for partial and transitional demands, the workers now more than ever before need mass organizations, principally trade unions. The powerful growth of trade unionism in France and the United States is the best refutation of the preachments of those ultra-left doctrinaires who have been teaching that trade unions have outlived their usefulness. Oh boy. Man, was he ever in for a rude awakening in the 70s when the trade unions got gutted and now the United States only sits at around 9% unionized workforce. It's like, oh, my sweet summer child. If only you knew. The Bolshevik Leninist. someone sent this to me recently. I'll show you guys. Radicalized Me from the chat sent me something pretty funny. Lenin failed to consider how fucking stupid Americans are. Hey, there he is. So yeah, this explosive growth in France and the United States shows that, the unions have outlived their usefulness. Like, oh man, if only he saw this coming. You were dying laughing when I had that on edibles last night. That's why you sent it to me. The Bolshevik Leninist stands in the frontline trenches of all kinds of struggles, even when they involve only the most modest material interest or democratic rights of the working class. This is again a reiteration of Marx. No matter how small a struggle is for workers, we stand there alongside them. And that includes all workers, that includes trans workers. Unlike the fucking idiot Marxists on Twitter that seem to think that, homosexuality and transgender is some kind of bourgeois decadence. It's counterproductive. It's counter-revolutionary, and thankfully these people are only online. LGBTQ CIA agenda. Yeah, exactly. He takes active part in mass trade unions for the purpose of strengthening them and raising their spirit of militancy. Absolutely correct, Cupcake Star. Transphobes will get the wall. So yeah, our task is to take part in mass trade unions for the purpose of strengthening them and raising their spirit of militancy. He fights uncompromisingly against any attempt to subordinate the unions to the bourgeois state and bind the proletariat to compulsory arbitration. Okay, yeah, so this is like... arbitration, so it's like when the state gets involved. Like, we see this all the time happening with strikes. The strikes reach an impasse, and so some jackass from the National Labor Relations Board has to step in and negotiate a deal. Often ends up with back to work legislation. This is the sort of stuff Trotsky's warning against. And every other form of police guardianship. Not only fascist, but also democratic, quote unquote democratic. Only on the basis of such work within the trade unions is successful struggle possible against the reformists, including those of the Stalinist bureaucracy. Sectarian attempts to build or preserve small revolutionary unions as a second edition of the party signify in actuality the renouncing of the struggle for leadership of the working class. It is necessary to establish this firm rule. Self-isolation and the capitulationist variety from mass trade unions, which is tantamount to a betrayal of the revolution, is incompatible with membership in the Fourth International. Okay, so we still have to participate in trade unions. Lenin talks about this in Left-Wing Communism and Infantile Disorder. By not, even though they can be right-wing and reactionary, by not participating in them, you're still ceding power to a certain class, to a certain labor aristocracy. At the same time, the Fourth International resolutely rejects and condemns trade union fetishism, equally characteristic of trade unionists and syndicalists. Right? One big union. My anarcho-syndicalist comrades are cool, but this is who Trotsky's also talking about. You're not going to see state power with everyone in a union. Trade unions do not offer, and in line with their task, composition, and manner of recruiting membership, they don't offer a finished revolutionary program. In consequence, they cannot replace the party. The building of a national revolutionary parties as sections of the Fourth International is the central task of the transitional epoch. I don't know. I don't care. So what he's saying is unions are not be all end all, right? And we know that. We're Marxists. Of course we know that. Trade unions, even the most powerful, embrace no more than 20 to 25% of the working class. Oh my God. This is wildly optimistic. And at that, predominantly the more skilled and better paid layers. The more oppressed majority of the working class is drawn only episodically into the struggle. during a period of exceptional upsurges in the labor movement. During such moments, it is necessary to create organizations ad hoc, embracing the whole fighting mass, strike committees, factory committees, and finally, Soviets, workers' councils. As organizations expressive of the top layers of the proletariat, trade unions, as witnessed by all past historical experience, including the fresh experience of the anarcho-syndicalist unions in Spain, developed powerful tendencies toward compromise with the bourgeois democratic regime. In periods of acute class struggle, the leading bodies of the trade unions aim to become masters of the mass movement in order to render it harmless. This is already occurring during the period of simple strikes, especially in the case of the mass sit-down strikes, which shake the principle of bourgeois property. In time of war or revolution, when the bourgeoisie is plunged into exceptional difficulties, trade union leaders usually become bourgeois ministers. So, right, when push comes to shove, very often trade union leadership, without the pushback of a party, will often also capitulate to the bourgeoisie. Therefore, the sections of the Fourth International should always strive not only to renew the top leadership of the trade unions boldly and resolutely in critical moments and advancing new militant leaders in place of routine functionaries and careerists, right? But also to create, in all possible instances, independent militant organizations corresponding more closely to the tasks of mass struggle against bourgeois society and, if necessary, not flinching even in the face of a direct break with the conservative apparatus of the trade unions. Fucking Trotsky is the master of run-on sentences, I swear to God. Advancing new militant leaders in place of routine functionaries and careerists. So one example I can think of actually is the averted rail strike from last year. One of the railroad unions actually threw out their president. They recalled him and they elected a worker from their own ranks to be head of the rail union, right? That's what we're talking about. That's what we need more of. If it be criminal to turn one's back on mass organizations for the sake of fostering sectarian factions, it is no less so passively to tolerate subordination of the revolutionary mass movement to the control of openly reactionary, disguised conservative, progressive, and bureaucratic cliques. Trade unions are not ends in themselves, they are but means along the road to proletarian revolution. Boom. Alright, so factory committees. This should be fun. During a transitional epoch, the workers' movement does not have a systematic and well-balanced, but a feverish and explosive character. Slogans as well as organizational forms should be subordinated into the indices of the movement. On guard against routine handling of a situation as against a plague, the leadership should respond sensitively to the initiative of the masses. Sit-down strikes, the latest expression of this kind of initiative, go beyond the limits of normal capitalist procedure. Independently of the demands of the strikers, the temporary seizure of factories deals a blow to the idle capitalist property. So we saw a lot of sit-down strikes in Michigan in the 30s, actually, in the factories. So sit-down strikes. So there's a capitalist procedure of strikes, and sit-down strikes kind of like breaks through that. And this is the creativity of the working class that we see. Independently of the demands of the strikers, the temporary seizure of factories deals a blow to the idle capitalist property. Yeah, so even if they're on strike, the workers can seize them in sit-down strikes. Every sit-down strike poses a practical manner of the question of who is the boss of the factory, the capitalist or the workers. If the sit-down strike raises this question episodically, the factory committee gives it the organized expression. Elected by all the factory employees, the factory committee immediately creates a counterweight to the will of the administration. To the reformist criticism of bosses, of the so-called economic royalist type like Ford, in contradistinction to good democratic exploiters, we counterpose the slogan of factory committees as centers of struggle against both the first and the second. Trade union bureaucrats will, as a general rule, resist the creation of factory committees just as they resist every bold step along the road of mobilizing the masses. So this is an example of a dual power, right? The factory owner still owns the factory, but who controls the factory is another question, right? And this is where we start to see the contradictions come to light. It's very exciting stuff. Trade union bureaucrats will resist the creation of factory committees just as they resist every bold step along the road of mobilizing the masses. So again, this is where the trade union bureaucrats will step in, and they'll be like, no, you have to do this our way. However, the wider the sweep of the movement, the easier will it be to break this resistance. Where the closed shop has already been instituted in peaceful times, the committee will formally coincide with the usual organ of the trade union, but will renew its personnel and widen its functions. The prime significance of the committee, however, lies in the fact that it becomes the militant staff for such working class layers, as the trade union is usually incapable of moving to action. It is precisely from these more oppressed layers that the most self-sacrificing battalions of the revolution will come. From the moment that the committee makes its appearance, a factual dual power is established in the factory. By its very essence, it represents the transitional state because it includes in itself two irreconcilable regimes, the capitalist and the proletarian. The fundamental significance of factory committees is precisely contained in the fact that they open the doors, if not to a direct revolutionary, then to a pre-revolutionary period between the bourgeois and the proletarian regimes. That the propagation of the factory committee idea is neither premature nor artificial is amply attested to by the waves of sit-down strikes spreading through several countries. New waves of this type will be inevitable in the immediate future. It is necessary to begin a campaign in favor of factory committees in time in order not to be caught unawares. Willow FGC, thank you for the follow. Where was I? Right, sit-down strikes is a very, very good strategy for working class to demonstrate their power. Business secrets and workers' control of industry. Okay, so earlier we talked about the capitalists are going to cry about how they can't afford to pay us, according to inflation or according to the demands of full employment, right? Hiring more and more unemployed people to spread the work around at no loss of pay, right? Reducing the work week. 32-hour work week is a brilliant transitional demand. A lot of places are actually trying it out. You want to stay productive, hire more people. It's that simple. Liberal capitalism, based upon competition and free trade, has completely receded into the past. Its successor, monopolistic capitalism, right? So liberal capitalism. So liberal in the sense of, the French and American Revolution type, liberty, freedom, fraternity, brotherhood, that sort of shit. Freedom for who exactly, right? So freedom for the bourgeoisie, essentially, to make up their own rules and exploit as much as humanly possible. That's what we mean by liberal capitalism. Basically, unfettered capitalism has now turned into monopoly capitalism, right? We read the last theoretical text we read was Lenin's imperialism. It gets heavily into that. Very, very simple. In capitalism, there are winners and there are losers. And the winners buy up the assets of the losers for pennies on the dollar, thus creating a monopoly. Not only does it not mitigate the anarchy of the market, but on the contrary, imparts to it a particularly convulsive character. The necessity of controlling economy, of placing state guidance over industry, and of planning is today recognized, at least in words, by almost all current bourgeois and petty bourgeois tendencies, from fascist to social democratic. With the fascists, it is mainly a question of planned plundering of the people for military purposes. The social democrats prepare to drain the ocean of anarchy with spoonfuls of bureaucratic planning. Engineers and professors write articles about technocracy. Wow, this word goes way back. You're Elon Musk's. In their cowardly experiments and regulation, democratic governments run head-on into the invincible sabotage of big capital. Some wonderful dancing dinosaurs there, Comrade Rachel. Right, so, bourgeois regulation goes nowhere, does nothing, it's completely useless. The actual relationship existing between the exploiters and the democratic controllers is best characterized by the fact that the gentlemen reformers stop short in pious trepidation before the threshold of the trusts in their business secrets. Here the principle of non-interference with business dominates. The account kept... Okay, hang on. I'm going to reread this. The actual relationship existing between the exploiters and the democratic controllers is best characterized by the fact that the gentlemen reformers stop short in pious trepidation before the threshold of the trusts of their business secrets. Here, the principle of non-interference with business dominates. Right, okay. So yeah, it's a trade secret that's sacred. You can't touch it. Patents is a thing. The fact that the COVID vaccine is patented should be a crime against humanity. The accounts kept between the individual capitalist and society remain the secret of the capitalist. They are not the concern of society. The motivation offered for the principle of business secrets is ostensibly, as in the epoch of liberal capitalism, that of free competition. In reality, the trusts keep no secrets from one another. The business secrets of the present epoch are part of a persistent plot of monopoly capitalism against the interests of society. Projects for limiting the autocracy of economic royalists will continue to be pathetic farces as long as private owners of the social means of production can hide from producers and consumers the machinations of exploitation, robbery, and fraud. The abolition of business secrets is the first step towards actual control of industry. So yeah, get rid of the patent system, open the books, right? So when the capitalist cries poverty, when you say, give us higher wages or we will shut this factory down, and the boss goes, no, I can't afford it, we abolish business secrets and say, okay, let's open the books because you're either lying or you're incompetent. Cupcake Star says, it was literally funded by U.S. tax dollars. They literally developed it for free. There should be no cost whatsoever. Yeah. In fact, I think one of the COVID vaccines was going to be open source. So, because there's like 200 vaccine manufacturers around the world. And one of them, I think it was I want to say AstraZeneca, wanted to open source it. And Bill Gates stepped in and was like, no, don't do that. We'll make a lot of money the other way around. They couldn't even let a global pandemic get in the way of making as much fucking profit as possible. It is completely insane. Workers no less than capitalists have the right to know the secrets of the factory, of the trust, of the whole branch of industry, of the national economy as a whole. First and foremost, banks, heavy industry, and centralized transport should be placed under an observation glass. The immediate tasks of workers' control should be to explain the debits and credits of society, beginning with individual business undertakings, to determine the actual share of the national income appropriated by individual capitalists and the exploiters as a whole, to expose the behind-the-scenes deals and swindles of banks and trusts, and finally to reveal to all members of society that unconscionable squandering of human labor which is the result of capitalist anarchy and the naked pursuit of profits. So yeah, where's your money coming from and where's it going? China also offered to share research with U.S. teams when the vaccine was still in its development stage, but we turned them away because China bad. Oh my God, amazing. We truly are the worst. Meanwhile, didn't Cuba develop their own vaccine? No office holder of the bourgeois state is in a position to carry out this work, no matter how great authority one would wish to endow him. All the world was witness to the impotence of President Roosevelt and Premier Bloom against the plottings of the 60 or 200 families of their respective nations. To break the resistance of the exploiters, the mass pressure of the proletariat is necessary. Only factory committees can bring about real control of production, calling in as consultants but not as technocrats, specialists sincerely devoted to the people, accountants, statisticians, engineers, scientists, etc. So it's not just workers. Like, we're obviously going to need specialists to come in and like do a lot of these jobs that your average grease monkey can't do. They've had to make several of their own vaccines thanks to U.S. sanctions. Classic, of course. They love cigars that much, they'd rather develop a treatment to stave off lung cancer. Yeah. How about a cigar that cures lung cancer? The struggle against unemployment is not to be considered without the calling for a broad and bold organization of public works. But public works can have a continuous and progressive significance for society. As for the unemployed themselves, only when they are made part of a general plan worked out to cover a considerable number of years. Within the framework of this plan, the workers would demand resumption as public utilities of work and private businesses closed as a result of the crisis. Workers' control in such case would be replaced by direct workers' management. So all the shit's gone out of business, but the work still needs to be done. So it's like, okay, let's expropriate the factories, and the workers will manage it themselves. The working out of even the most elementary economic plan, from the point of view of the exploited, not the exploiters, is impossible without workers' control. That is, without the penetration of the worker's eye into all open and concealed springs of capitalist economy. Committees representing individual businesses, enterprises, should meet at conference to choose corresponding committees of trusts, whole branches of industry, economic regions, and finally of national industry as a whole. Thus, workers' control becomes a school for the planned economy. On the basis of the experience of control, the proletariat will prepare itself for direct management of nationalized industry when the hour for that eventuality strikes. Right. Okay. So yeah, factory committees are just meeting with other committees. They're learning about each other's industries, right? You don't need a factory owner to make a phone call to make an order to another factory to send you the parts that you need to complete your car. Workers know their own shop floor is the best, but they don't know everything, right? So, factory committees can then start to work together in conjunction, in cooperation, rather than in competition. And in doing this, workers eventually learn how to control and manage industry as a whole. And they learn how to plan the economy from the ground up. To those capitalists, mainly of the lower and middle strata, who of their own accord sometimes offer to throw open their books to the workers, usually to demonstrate the necessity of lowering wages. Right, so sometimes your petty bourgeois bosses will open the books and say, look, see, I can't afford it. The workers answer that they are not interested in the bookkeeping of individual bankrupts or semi-bankrupts, but in the account ledgers of all exploiters as a whole. The workers cannot and do not wish to accommodate the level of their living conditions to the exigencies of individual capitalists, themselves victims of their own regime. The task is one of reorganizing the whole system of production and distribution on a more dignified and workable basis. If the abolition of business secrets be a necessary condition to workers' control, then control is the first step along the road to the socialist guidance of economy. Okay, so quick little anecdote here. This is really, really interesting. This actually speaks very true to what I went through when I was organizing my own company, right? I unionized a small business. You hear all the fucking sob stories about how they can't afford it. They're going to go under. They're going to, they had to like talk my boss off the ledge of a building, figuratively, of course. But like, we explained to her over and over again, like, it's not personal. Like, we know it's not just this company, right? We are unionizing archaeologists across all of Ontario, right? it's not just one company, because we know you can't unionize just one company. It's not going to work. We can't get what we deserve with one small business company, right? So we had to get several big fish in addition to a bunch of small fish. And we intuitively knew that. I knew that, and we figured that out long before I read a single word of Marx. So yeah, workers are capable of like intuitively understanding this. Like, no, it's not just we're not interested in just one company. We're interested in the entire industry. So yeah, expropriation of separate groups of capitalists. The socialist program of expropriation, of political overthrow of the bourgeoisie and liquidation of its economic domination should in no case during the present transitional period hinder us from advancing, when the occasion warrants, the demand for the expropriation of several key branches of industry vital for national existence or of the most parasitic group of the bourgeoisie. Thus, in answer to the pathetic jeremiads of the gentlemen Democrats, anent, I don't know, this must be a spelling mistake, the dictatorship of the 60 families of the United States or the 200 families of France, we counterpose the demand for the expropriation of those 60 or 20 feudalistic capitalist warlords. Hello from hotel room. Hey, Kat, how you doing? In precisely the same way, we demand the expropriation of the corporations holding monopolies on war industries, railroads, the most important sources of raw materials, etc. The difference between these demands and the muddle-headed reformist slogan of nationalization lies in the following. Number 1, we reject indemnification. Number 2, we warn the masses against demagogues of the People's Front who, giving lip service to nationalization, remain in reality agents of capital. We call upon the masses to rely only upon their own revolutionary strength. We link up the question of expropriation with that seizure of power by the workers and farmers. Right, okay, so the muddle-headed reformist slogan of nationalization. So nationalization under the reformists, it's like, yeah, let Biden and the Democrat Party nationalize the railroads. Sure, why not? Right, and so you're not going to win if you collaborate with the bourgeoisie in nationalization, right? It's not far enough, right? They will betray you. Don't trust the liberals. People's Front remains agents of capital. We call upon the masses to rely only upon their own revolutionary strength. And we link up the question of expropriation with that of seizure of power by the workers and farmers, right? So expropriation comes with power, right? And that is a key difference between reformism. Pineapple Pizza Juice, thank you for the follow. So that is the difference between a reform and a transitional demand as well. Expropriation comes with the seizure of power by the workers and farmers.
You're the most amazing guy. You're brilliant, you're handsome, you're rich.
Thank you, Pineapple. The necessity of advancing the slogan of expropriation in the course of daily agitation in partial form, and not only in our propaganda in its more comprehensive aspects, is dictated by the fact that different branches of industry are on different levels of development, occupy a different place in the life of society, and pass through different stages of the class struggle. Only a general revolutionary upsurge of the proletariat can place the complete expropriation of the bourgeoisie on the order of the day. The task of transitional demands is to prepare the proletariat to solve this problem. Right, so what he's saying is like, yeah, things have combined in uneven development. Not all branches are advanced, are this advanced. They will pass through different stages of class struggle. So basically what he's saying is we got to meet workers where they are. So we got to understand like what their industry is like. Expropriating a coffee shop is going to be different than expropriating a rail yard. Your problem. The bunny stomping his foot. expropriation of the private banks and statization of the credit system. Right? This is something we definitely all agree with. Imperialism means the domination of finance capital, side by side with the trusts and syndicates, and very frequently rising above them. The banks concentrate in their hands the actual command over the economy. So basically, he's summarizing Lenin here and the advent of finance capital. Again, go read Imperialism if you haven't read it or if you haven't watched my stream already. In their structure, the banks express in a concentrated form the entire structure of modern capital. They combine tendencies of monopoly with tendencies of anarchy. So again, unity of opposites, monopoly and anarchy. Trotsky really, truly was a master dialectician. I am at 699 followers. Let's try and hit 700 tonight. And then we're 70% of the way there to me reading Capital in manga on stream. Sorry, folks, one sec. Okay, we're back. They organize the miracles of technology, giant enterprises, mighty trusts, and they also organize high prices, crises, and unemployment. It is impossible to take a single serious step in the struggle against monopolistic despotism and capitalistic anarchy, which supplement one another in their work of destruction, if the commanding posts of banks are left in the hands of predatory capitalists. In order to create a unified system of investments and credits along a rational plan corresponding to the interests of the entire people, it is necessary to merge all the banks into a single national institution, a national bank. And then we have one of my favorite scenes from Neil Breen film where we can have a president of the bank. I don't know if anyone's seen Fateful Findings by Neil Breen. Phenomenal movie. And it is a CEO is a banker at the end. He commits suicide on screen. And then he goes, "As president of the bank, I've been exposed for my crimes." It's so fucking good. Anyway, but yeah, so maybe Neil Breen is writing about a fantasy universe where all banks have been amalgamated into one national state bank. What was the name? There's the director Neil Breen, and the movie was, I believe it was Fateful Findings. It was one of his earlier films, and it's just incredible. It might be my favorite. It's got the famous scene where the girl shoots the car full of, like, she shoots the Ferrari, the guy jumps in front of it, and then he dies. So she kills her husband. It's such a good movie. Only the expropriation of the private banks and the concentration of the entire credit system in the hands of the state will provide the latter with the necessary actual, i.e. material resources, and not merely paper and bureaucratic resources for economic planning. That's the one where yes, that's one of them where he keeps destroying laptops, yeah. Spills coffee all over it, throws books at it. They're never on. Fuck, man, we should just watch a Neil Breen film on stream one day. That'd be so fun. So yeah, combine everything into one bank. One aspect of this, actually, very experimental, and you can see why the ruling class would be very, very opposed to it. The US used to do it in the 60s. It's called postal banking. It's where you can open a simple, free checking account at a post office. I'm still down to co-host the Communist King of the Hill podcast. Oh my god. You know what, man? If I was like unemployed, that's the sort of shit I would do. I would absolutely be down for that. I would basically have to like drop all my reading groups. You'd have to watch like several episodes a week and just like do a little write-up on it. Oh yeah, everyone go buy Kat's book. The expropriation of the banks in no case implies the expropriation of bank deposits. On the contrary, the single state bank will be able to create much more favorable conditions for the small depositors than could the private banks. In the same way, only the state bank can establish for farmers, tradesmen, and small merchants conditions of favorable, that is, cheap credit. Even more important, however, is the circumstance that the entire economy, first and foremost, large-scale industry and transport directed by a single financial staff, will serve the vital interests of the workers and all other toilers. However, the statization of the banks will produce these favorable results only if the state power itself passes completely from the hands of the exploiters into the hands of the toilers. So you cut down on a lot of red tape and a lot of waste if you have one bank, essentially, and on a shittier, lesser scale, or in a different sense, Medicare for All is kind of like the healthcare version of this. Single payer healthcare, right? You cut down on a lot of waste, a lot of red tape, just get what you need to people who need it. Simple.
Because I'm a perfect physical specimen and I'm extremely young.
Thank you, Kat. The picket line. All right. Now we're starting to get into some juicy stuff here. Sit-down strikes are a serious warning from the masses addressed not only to the bourgeoisie, but also to the organizations of the workers, including the Fourth International. In 1919 to 20, the Italian workers seized factories on their own initiative, thus signaling the news to their leaders of the coming of the social revolution. The leaders, quote, unquote, paid no heed to the signal. The victory of fascism was the result. So yeah, again, failure of leadership to read the room. Sit-down strikes do not yet mean the seizure of factories in the Italian manner, but they are a decisive step towards such seizures. The present crisis can sharpen the class struggle to an extreme point and bring nearer the moment of denouement. But that does not mean that a revolutionary situation comes on at one stroke. Actually, its approach is signalized by a continuous series of convulsions. One of these is the wave of sit-down strikes. The problem of the sections of the Fourth International is to help the proletarian vanguard understand the general character of the tempo of our epoch and to fructify in time the struggle of the masses with ever more resolute and organizational measures. So basically, you have to anticipate the reaction of the state in order to counteract it. The sharpening of the proletariat struggle means the sharpening of the methods of counterattack on the part of capital. New waves of sit-down strikes can call forth, and undoubtedly will call forth, resolute countermeasures on the part of the bourgeoisie. Preparatory work is already being done by the confidential staffs of big trusts. Woe to the revolutionary organizations. Woe to the proletariat if it is again caught unawares. Right? So the clubs are coming, right? The police, the guys with guns, they are coming to pull you and force you back to work at gunpoint. So what do? Crossword Solver says, during my reading group for this, at the part we had a discussion about how the conditions today mean we need to make a lot less concessions to the petty bourgeoisie, i.e. cheap credit, not that we still wouldn't need that. Yeah, I don't know about that. The conditions today mean we need to make a lot less concessions to the petty bourgeoisie. Man, I guess so, because like small businesses really are not all that, like they're not that many, and they're not that powerful. A lot of them are on the verge of proletarianization, but they still serve the basis of fascism. Yes, for that reason. Yeah, okay. Good. I'm glad I'm not a total dummy. Sometimes I worry, like, I don't know, did you ever get imposter syndrome? Where it's like, man, I really have no idea what I'm talking about. I've only read this book once, actually, and I had a lead-off prepared on it, but that was like 3 years ago. And then I realized, like, man, it's been a long time since I've read this. Trump is a total cheap ass. He used a bail bondsman to post bail. It would be hilarious if he decided not to pay them. I can't believe he surrendered, to be honest. If I were Trump, I'd be like, send your federal agents, come get me. Also of note, what's funny is the only black guy implicated in this conspiracy failed to post bond, so he remains in jail, of course. That's why even if, if you're a minority, if you think you're going to be spared, if you join the right wing, you will not be spared. There's a bunny. It looks really bad if they have to send the U.S. Marshals to come pick you up. Maybe. It's one of those bizarre contradictions that no one can seem to figure out, that the more they come after Trump, the more popular he gets. Because, like, Democrats they cannot understand why Trump is popular. They can't figure it out. The Democrats are angrily pointing at a rule book that says golden retrievers cannot play basketball. Meanwhile, a golden retriever is dunking on them over and over and over again. Okay, finally, I'm glad somebody liked that. The media keeps giving him free press, and he plays really well to, he's got an instinct for populism. That's probably my favorite metaphor. Hairbud, yeah. That's my favorite metaphor in describing the relationship between the Democrats and Republicans. Democrats are screaming, he's breaking the rules, and like that's why he's popular. The bourgeoisie is nowhere satisfied with the official police and army. In the United States, even during peaceful times, the bourgeoisie maintains militarized battalions of scabs and privately armed thugs in factories. To this must now be added the various groups of American Nazis. Yeah, they filled Madison Square Garden, American Nazis. Scabs and thugs. So this is a reason why labor needs to stand with homeless people and with unemployed people. Because when you make that demand that everyone is employed, then there is no pool that the bourgeoisie can then bribe to act as scabs, right? The French bourgeoisie, at the first approach of danger, mobilized semi-legal and illegal fascist detachments, including such as are in the army. No sooner does the pressure of the English workers once again become stronger than immediately the fascist bands are doubled, trebled, increased tenfold to come out in bloody march. I wonder if this is supposed to say tripled, not trebled. Increased tenfold to come out in bloody march against the workers. The bourgeoisie keeps itself most accurately informed about the fact that the present epoch in class struggle irresistibly tends to transform itself into civil war. The examples of Italy, Germany, Austria, Spain, and other countries taught considerably more to the magnates and lackeys of capital than to the official leaders of the proletariat. The politicians of the Second and Third Internationals, as well as the bureaucrats of the trade unions, consciously closed their eyes to the bourgeoisie's private army. Otherwise, they could not preserve their alliance with it. for even 24 hours. The reformists systematically implant in the minds of the workers the notion that the sacredness of democracy is best guaranteed when the bourgeoisie is armed to the teeth and the workers are unarmed. So yeah, a little bit of shots fired there at Kautsky and the reformists. If he doesn't pay his bondsmen, they'll come and drag your ass back to jail. I can't believe we got a mugshot, and I can't believe trebled means tripled. Oh, okay. And the fact that he posted on Twitter for the first time since January 6th. AOC is getting us new sunscreen with less regulations. Thank God. What a fucking joke. The duty of the Fourth International is to put an end to such slavish policies once and for all. The petty bourgeois Democrats, including Social Democrats, Stalinists, and anarchists, yell louder about the struggle against fascism, the more cravenly they capitulate to it in actuality. Only armed workers' detachments who feel the support of tens of millions of toilers behind them can successfully prevail against the fascist bands. The struggle against fascism does not start in the liberal editorial office, but in the factory, and ends in the street. Scabs and private gunmen in factory plants are the basic nuclei of the fascist army. Strike pickets are the basic nuclei of the proletarian army. This is our point of departure. In connection with every strike and street demonstration, it is imperative to propagate the necessity of creating workers' groups for self-defense. We cannot be pacifists, right? We can't just say, no, we can't use guns. Guns are the weapon of the enemy. Right? How many of you have heard that? It's like, no, like the fascists are coming. Like, what do you do? What are you going to do? They're coming to kill you. What do you do about it? Workers' groups for self-defense. It is necessary to write this slogan into the program of the revolutionary wing and the trade unions. It is imperative wherever possible, beginning with the youth groups, to organize groups for self-defense, to drill and acquaint themselves with the use of arms. That stupid Batman quote. Yeah, exactly. Radicalize me. Maintaining the status quo is violence. Yeah, agreed. A new upsurge of the mass movement should serve not only to increase the number of these units, but also to unite them according to neighborhoods, cities, and regions. It is necessary to give organized expression to the valid hatred of the workers towards scabs and bands of gangsters and fascists. It is necessary to advance the slogan of a workers' militia as one serious guarantee for the inviolability of workers' organizations, meetings, and press. Can anyone think of a Marxist organization in the United States that was actually showed a lot of success in arming themselves? What the hell is he doing? What is this bunny doing? Yeah, exactly. I was going to say the Black Panthers, not Black Hammer. This ridiculous bunny. It is necessary to advance the slogan of a workers' militia as one serious guarantee for the inviolability of workers' organizations at meeting and press. Only with that, yeah. So, this is interesting. Did you all see the footage of this like 97-year-old grandma? She runs a small town newspaper, and she published some stuff about city council that they didn't like, and so the cops fucking raided her home. And then she later died of a heart attack due to stress. Only with the help of such systematic, persistent, indefatigable, courageous, agitational, and organizational work. Boy, he loves his adjectives. Always on the basis of experience of the masses themselves, it is possible to root out from their consciousness the traditions of submissiveness and passivity, to train detachments of heroic fighters capable of setting an example to all toilers, to inflict a series of tactical defeats upon the armed thugs of counter-revolution, to raise the self-confidence of the exploited and oppressed, to compromise fascism in the eyes of the petty bourgeoisie, and pave the road for conquest of power by the proletariat. Yes, I heard about the shop owner who got gunned down by a homophobe over a pride flag. Yeah. Again, like, we're looking at the nucleus of fascism right now in the States, right? With these reactionary dipshits. I think some of these folks might think twice if there was an armed militia. And indeed, we've seen that, actually. We've seen armed detachments defending drag queen story hours. Antifa. All right, workers and farmers. Again, this demand has a little bit less relevance. Someone pointed out, petty bourgeois is far smaller in numbers. Again, only 1.2% of our population actually works on farms. Most of the farms are just like industrial magnates. The banks own the land. The farmers work. They're workers essentially, right? So. Not a ton of actual farmers left. And there's just a bunch of nonsense about, we have to protect the small family farms. Like, no, they don't exist anymore. Even if they did, they're a huge, like, in terms of economy of scale, they're actually a huge waste of resources. We have the power, we have the mechanization of farming to feed everybody. Let's stop this romantic petty bourgeois fantasy of the small family farm. Yeah, mountains of potatoes, Cupcake Star in Iowa, that they don't want to sell because it might lower the prices. Or lakes of milk get dumped when there's people starving in your own country. It's ridiculous. The brother in arms and counterpart of the worker in the country is the agricultural labor. They are two parts of one and the same class. Their interests are inseparable. The industrial workers' program of transitional demands, the changes here and there, is likewise the program of the agricultural proletariat. The peasants, farmers, represent another class. They are the petty bourgeoisie of the village. The petty bourgeoisie is made up of various layers, from the semi-proletarian to the exploiter elements. In accordance with this, the political task of the industrial proletariat is to carry the class struggle into the country. Only thus will he be able to draw a dividing line between his allies and his enemies. Yeah, this isn't to write off the country completely. Indeed, that's where we seem to see a lot of divide, especially in the United States. The peculiarities of the national development of each country will find their queerest expression based in the status of farmers and, to some extent, of the urban petty bourgeoisie, the artisans and the shopkeepers. These classes, no matter how numerically strong they may be, they're not, essentially are representative survivals of free capitalist forms of production. True. The sections of the Fourth International should work out with all possible concreteness a program of transitional demands concerning the peasants, the farmers, and the urban petty bourgeoisie in conformity with the conditions of each country. The advanced workers should learn to give clear and concrete answers to the questions put by their future allies. While the farmer remains an independent petty producer, he is in need of cheap credit, of agricultural machines, and fertilizer at prices he can afford to pay. Favorable conditions of transport and conscientious organization of the market for his agricultural products. But the banks, the trusts, the merchants rob the farmer from every side. Only the farmers themselves, with the help of the workers, can curb this robbery. Committees elected by small farmers should make their appearance on the national scene and jointly with the workers' committees and committees of banks and employees take into their hands control of transport, credit, and mercantile operations affecting agriculture. Basically, yeah, we should just make farming as easy as possible. By falsely citing the excessive demands of the workers, the big bourgeoisie skillfully transforms the question of commodity prices into a wedge to be driven between the workers and farmers and between the workers and the petty bourgeoisie of the cities. Again, how many times have we heard this before? Well, if wages go up, then obviously prices are going to go up. So yeah, fuck you, peasant. Keep your prices low. Keep your wages low. The peasant, artisan, small merchant, unlike the industrial worker, office, and civil service employee, cannot demand a wage increase corresponding to the increase in prices. The official struggle of the government with high prices is only a deception of the masses. But the farmers, artisans, merchants, in their capacity of consumers, can step into the politics of price fixing shoulder to shoulder with the workers. To the capitalist lamentations about costs of production or transport and trade, the consumers answer, show us your books. We demand control over the fixing of prices. So the consumers now, right? Remember, the petty bourgeois, they're still consumers. And they're like, show us the books. If it's too expensive, then you're lying or you're incompetent. How about we get rid of the bosses? Maybe that'll cut down the cost. The organs of this control should be the committees on prices made up of delegates from factories, trade unions, cooperatives, farmers, organizations, the little man of the city, housewives, etc. By this means, the workers will be able to prove to the farmers the real reason for high prices is not high wages, but the exorbitant profits of the capitalists and the overhead expenses of capitalist anarchy. Now, I know he railed against technocrats earlier, but we have the technology. We can calculate all this stuff in real time. We don't need these committees to actually figure this shit out. But the point still stands. Your shit is expensive because profits are high. That's the only reason. The program for the nationalization of the land and collectivization of agriculture should be so drawn that from its very basis, it should exclude the possibility of expropriation of small farmers and their compulsory collectivization. All right, so we only want the big dogs in terms of farming. The farmer will remain owner of his plot of land as long as he himself believes it possible or necessary. In order to rehabilitate the program of socialism in the eyes of the farmer, it is necessary to expose mercilessly the Stalinist methods of collectivization, which are dictated not by the interests of the farmers or workers, but by the interests of the bureaucracy. I don't know enough about the collectivization in the 30s in the USSR. I do plan on reading about it one of these days. The expropriation of the expropriators likewise does not signify forcible confiscation of the property of artisans and shopkeepers. On the contrary, workers' control of banks and trusts, even more, the nationalization of these concerns can create for the urban petty bourgeoisie incomparably more favorable conditions of credit purchases and sale than is possible under the unchecked domination of the monopolies. Dependence upon private capital will be replaced by dependence upon the state, which will be more attentive to the needs of a small co-workers, agents, and the more firmly the toilers themselves keeps the state in their own hands. The practical participation of the exploited farmers in the control of different fields of economy will allow them to decide for themselves whether or not it would be profitable for them to go over the collective working of the land, at what date and on what scale. Industrial workers should consider themselves duty-bound to show farmers every cooperation in traveling this road through the trade unions, factory committees, and above all three, workers and farmers' government. The alliance proposed by the proletariat, not to the middle classes in general, but to the exploited layers of the urban and rural petty bourgeoisie against all exploiters, including those of the middle classes, cannot be based upon compulsion, but only on free consent, which should be consolidated in a special contract. This contract is the program of transitional demands voluntarily accepted by both sides. So basically, you got to win over these farmers. You don't just take their land at gunpoint. And you win them over through cooperation, through nationalization of the banks and offering them cheap credit and making sure that prices stay low for them by expropriating billionaires. You know what? This text is showing that it's like way better than I thought it was. Like I said, I've only read this text once, and that was like 3 years ago. This really is like one of Trotsky's like best works. Struggle against imperialism and war. The whole world outlook, and consequently also the inner political life of individual countries, is overcast by the threat of world war. Already, imminent catastrophe sends violent ripples of apprehension through the very broadest masses of mankind. Oh, you're reading Revolution Betrayed. Nice. We'll definitely do Revolution Betrayed, although I'm probably not going to read Revolution Betrayed. I want to read chapter by chapter and kind of just summarize each chapter. I think that would be really interesting. Stalinist policies were a zigzag, at first holding off on collectivization against the calls of the opposition. This is one of the factors in the creation of the kulak class, and when Stalin eventually decided to do a mass reverse in collectivization, it massively destroyed productivity. I think a lot of that had to do with the kulaks themselves as well. Crossword solver. Out of protest, the rich peasants burned their grain and slaughtered their cattle. They only kept enough for themselves, leading to mass starvation. At least that's my understanding. That's as much as I know. In protest of the collectivization, no. Yeah, that's correct. That's why you have to show no mercy. Collectivization was a massive success and ended the history of recurrent famines. Yes, later. Once the kulaks were liquidated as a class, then yes, as far as I know, there weren't any more famines left. There weren't any more famines after that, and even the CIA admits Soviet citizens had more calories in their diets, and their food was healthier than their American counterparts. Great success. You know, credit where credit's due. The whole world outlook, and consequently also the inner political life of individual countries, is overcast by the threat of world war. Already, the imminent catastrophe sends violent ripples of apprehension through the very broadest masses of mankind. Cupcake Star says, the kulaks caused a famine purely out of spite because they were so pissed about collectivization. They 100% deserve the gulag. Yeah, like, people talk often about, they refer to it as the Holodomor, and they blame communism for causing famines, right? When it's, in reality, it was like, A, it was much more nuanced than that. And B, like, I have a Ukrainian source on the Holodomor that also gets into like the environmental factors as well. Like there's some really bad environmental factors that no one anticipated, which caused a lot of crop failure. But yeah, a lot of it was protest. Like, oh, communism causes famines. It's like, well, who actually fucking caused it? It's the it's the white supremacist shaving his head. He's like, look what you liberals made me do. Like, I hate to do this. A little more is banned to write propaganda. Yeah, like, don't forget, 2 million Russians also were part of that. 2 million Russians also died from that famine. They talk about how it's like, oh, poor Ukrainians. It's like, no. This is just, It was a colossal fuck up. Kazakhs also died, yeah. The Second International repeats its famous politics of 1914 with all the greater assurance since today that it is the Comintern which plays first fiddle in chauvinism. As quickly as the danger of war assumed concrete outline, the Stalinists, outstripping the bourgeois and petty bourgeois pacifists by far, became blatant haranguers for the so-called national defense. The revolutionary struggle against war thus rests fully on the shoulders of the Fourth International. The Bolshevik-Leninist policy regarding this question, formulated in the thesis of the International Secretariat, War in the Fourth International 1934, preserves all of its force today. In the next period, a revolutionary party will depend for success primarily on its policy on the question of war. A correct policy is composed of two elements: an uncompromising attitude on imperialism and its war, and the ability to base one's program on the experience of the masses themselves. Radicalized Me says, it's weird how every criticism of communism ends up being the dumbest asshole on earth saying the dumbest thing they could think of. Yeah. Bandera and his gang of dipshits started the rumor that it was intentional to starve Ukrainians for Stalin's enjoyment, like he was a Batman villain. Yep. And the CIA spread the lies. Yeah. Sure. I didn't know Bandera was directly connected to it. But it's really cool and good that, statues of Bandera are going up in Ukraine now. That was sarcasm. For those of you listening. Tonight's reading will also be put up on YouTube at some point, so your words will be immortalized. Even anti-Soviet historians like Conquest and Wheatcroft deny it was a genocide, but libs who call themselves socialists eat that shit up. Yeah. Yeah, itchy beard. Okay. So let's talk about imperialism and war. That's our favorite topic. I know you guys love this. The bourgeoisie and its agents use the war question more than any other to deceive the people by means of abstractions, general formulas, lame phraseology, neutrality, collective defense, arming for the defense of peace, struggle against fascism, and so on. All such formulas reduce themselves in the end to the fact that the war question, i.e., the fate of the people, is left in the hands of the imperialists, their governing staffs, their diplomacy, their generals, and with their intrigues and plots against the people. The Fourth International rejects with abhorrence all such abstractions, which play the same role in the democratic camp as in the fascist honor, blood, and race. But abhorrence is not enough. Abhorrence, sorry. It is imperative to help the masses discern by means of verifying criteria, slogans, and demands the concrete essence of fraudulent abstractions. Disarmament? But the entire question revolves around who will disarm whom. The only disarmament which can avert or end war is the disarmament of the bourgeoisie by the workers. But to disarm the bourgeoisie, the workers must arm themselves. Again, this is why we are one of the very few channels on Twitch that are actually pro-arming workers. A lot of leftists and liberals on Twitch, they'll be like, no, we need to ban guns. But yeah, that raises the question, who is disarming whom? Neutrality? But the proletariat is nothing like neutral in the war between Japan and China, or a war between Germany and the USSR. Then what is meant is the defense of China and the USSR? Of course, but not by the imperialists who will strangle both China and the USSR. Sorry, he's calling for, the proletariat to defend the USSR. Defense of the fatherland? By this abstraction, the bourgeoisie understands the defense of its profits and plunder. We stand ready to defend the fatherland from foreign capitalists if we first bind our own capitalists hand and foot and hinder them from attacking foreign fatherlands. If the workers and the farmers of our country become its real masters, if the wealth of the country be transferred from the hands of a tiny minority to the hands of the people, if the army becomes a weapon of the exploited instead of the exploiters. It is necessary to interpret these fundamental ideals by breaking them up into more concrete and partial ones, dependent upon the course of events and the orientation of thought of the masses. In addition, it is necessary to differentiate strictly between the pacifism of the diplomat, professor, journalist, and the pacifism of the carpenter, agricultural worker, and the chairwoman. In one case, pacifism is a screen for imperialism. In the other, it is the confused expression of distrust in imperialism. When the small farmer or worker speaks about the defense of the fatherland, he means defense of his home, his family, and other similar families from invasion, bombs, and poison gas. The capitalist and his journalist understand by the defense of the fatherland the seizure of colonies and markets, the predatory increase of the national share of the world income. The bourgeois pacifism and patriotism are shot through with deceit. In the pacifism and even patriotism of the oppressed, there are elements which reflect on the one hand a hatred of destructive war, and on the other a clinging to what they believe to be their own good, elements which we must know how to seize upon in order to draw the requisite conclusions. Using these considerations at its point of departure, the Fourth International supports every, even if insufficient, demand, if it can draw the masses to a certain extent into active politics, awaken their criticism, and strengthen their control over the machinations of the bourgeoisie. From this point of view, our American section, for example, entirely supports the proposal for establishing a referendum on the question of declaring war. No democratic reform, it is understood, can by itself prevent the rulers from provoking war when they wish it. It is necessary to give frank warning of this, but notwithstanding the illusions of the masses in regard to the proposed referendum, their support of it reflects the distrust felt by workers and farmers for bourgeois government and Congress. Without supporting and without sparing illusions, it is necessary to support with all possible strength the progressive distrust of the exploited toward the exploiters. The more widespread the movement of the referendum becomes, the sooner will the bourgeois pacifists move away from it, the more completely will the betrayers of the Comintern be compromised, the more acute will distrust of the imperialists become. From this viewpoint, it is necessary to advance the demand. Electoral rights for men and women beginning with the age of 18, those will be called upon to die for the fatherland tomorrow should have the right to vote today. The struggle against war must first of all begin with the revolutionary mobilization of the youth. Cupcake Star says, California governor is trying to convene a constitutional convention for gun control, despite the fact that it will undoubtedly fail and will open the door for conservatives to create federal legislation attacking LGBTQ plus people and minorities. Oh, it's so fucked up. This whole fucking world's so fucked. Light must be shed upon the problem of war from all angles, hinging upon the side from which it will confront the masses at a given moment. War is a gigantic commercial enterprise, especially for the war industry. The 60 families, so he's talking about the 1% here when he mentions 60 families, are therefore first-line patriots and the chief provocateurs of war. Workers' control of war industries is the first step in the struggle against the manufacturers of war. So when it comes to like our discussions on gun control, one aspect that I raised, and I'm really glad I came to this conclusion, is because I am slowly coming to understand the methodology of Marxism. I was calling for the nationalization of the gun factories in the States. Under workers' control, workers can then decide how guns are marketed and who they're sold to. So they can deal a blow to imperialism by refusing to sell arms to, say, Ukraine or Saudi Arabia. And at the same time, they can change the marketing of firearms, right? The workers themselves can take control and get rid of this bullshit, dumbass, Wild West, John Wick style, life that they're selling, right? This idea that you have to John Wick your way to the grocery store every single day. I support gun rights for everyone except the salty in America. Everyone can have a gun except for you. To the slogan of the reformists, a tax on military profit. Oh my God, he would have loved Elizabeth Warren and her push for a green military. A tax on military profit, we counterpose the slogan confiscation of military profit and expropriation of the traffickers in war industries. Where military industry is nationalized, as in France, the slogan of workers' control preserves its full strength. The proletariat has as little confidence in the government of the bourgeoisie as in an individual capitalist. Not one man and not one penny for the bourgeois government. Not an armaments program, but a program of useful public works. Complete independence of workers' organizations from military police control. Once and for all, we must tear it from the hands of the greedy and merciless imperialist clique, scheming behind the backs of the people, the disposition of the people's fate. In accordance with this, we demand complete abolition of secret diplomacy, all treaties and agreements to be made accessible to all workers and farmers, military training and arming of workers and farmers under direct control of workers and farmers committees, creation of military schools for the training of commanders among the toilers chosen by workers' organizations, substitution for the standing army of a people's militia, indissolubly linked up with the factories, mines, and farms. Imperialist war is the continuation and sharpening of the predatory politics of the bourgeoisie. The struggle of the proletariat against war is the continuation and sharpening of its class struggle. The beginning of war alters the situation and partially the means of struggle between the classes, but not the aim and basic course. The imperialist bourgeoisie dominates the world. In its basic character, the approaching war will therefore be an imperialist war. The fundamental content of the politics of the international proletariat will consequently be a struggle against imperialism and its war. In this struggle, the basic principle is the chief enemy is your own country, or the defeat of your own imperialist government is the lesser evil. But not all countries in the world are imperialist countries. On the contrary, the majority are victims of imperialism. Some of the colonial or semi-colonial countries will undoubtedly attempt to utilize the war in order to ease off the yoke of slavery. Their war will not be imperialist, but liberating. It will be the duty of the international proletariat to aid the oppressed countries in their war against oppressors. And the same duty applies in regard to aiding the USSR or whatever other workers' government might arise before the war or during the war. The defeat of every imperialist government in the struggle with the workers' state with a colonial country is the lesser evil. So yeah, he's calling on the unconditional defense of the USSR against imperialist invaders. The workers of imperialist countries, however, cannot help an anti-imperialist country through their own government, no matter what might be the diplomatic and military relations between the two countries at a given moment. If the governments find themselves in a temporary and, by the essence of the matter, unreliable alliance, the proletariat of the imperialist country continues to remain in class opposition to its own government and supports the non-imperialist ally through its own methods, through the methods of the international class struggle, agitation not only against the perfidious allies, but also in favor of a worker state in a colonial country, boycott, strikes in one case, rejection of boycott and strikes in another case, etc. In supporting the colonial country or the USSR in a war, the proletariat does not, in the slightest degree, solidarize either with the bourgeois government of the colonial country or with the Thermidorian bureaucracy of the USSR. On the contrary, it maintains full political independence from one as from the other. Giving aid in a just and progressive war, the revolutionary proletariat wins the sympathy of the workers in the colonies and in the USSR, strengthens the authority and influence of the Fourth International and increases its ability to help overthrow the bourgeois government in the colonial country, the reactionary bureaucracy in the USSR. At the beginning of the war, the sections of the Fourth International will inevitably feel themselves isolated. Every war takes the national masses unawares and impels them to the side of the government apparatus. The internationalists will have to swim against the stream. However, the devastation and misery brought about by the new war, which in the first months will far outstrip the bloody horrors of 1914 to 18, will quickly prove sobering. The discontents of the masses and the revolt will grow by leaps and bounds. The sections of the Fourth International will be found at the head of the revolutionary tide. The program of transitional demands will gain burning actuality. The problem of the conquest of power by the proletariat will loom in full stature. Before exhausting or drowning mankind in blood, capitalism befouls the world atmosphere with the poisonous vapors of national and race hatred. Anti-Semitism today is one of the most malignant convulsions of capitalism's death agony. An uncompromising disclosure of the roots of race prejudice in all forms and shades of national arrogance and chauvinism, particularly anti-Semitism, should become part of the daily work of all sections of the Fourth International as the most important part of the struggle against imperialism and war. Our basic slogan remains, workers of the world, unite. Okay, and we'll pick it up. I've been going for 2 hours now. I think we'll pick it up part 2 next week. Continued in part 2. And we will stop recording.